Joining us from Wilmington, Delaware, member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Democratic Senator Chris Coons. Senator Coons has a new op-ed calling on America to pay up in the fight against ISIS. You write in Sunday's Philadelphia Inquirer, "If we must fight, we must pay." Tell us about the piece. The senator writes, sorry, there's little precedent in pre-9/11 American history for charging into war without finding a way to pay for it. From the War of 1812, for which Congress approved new taxes in 3 consecutive years, to the Gulf War, Congress took steps to pay for every major conflict. Yet Congress has failed to offset the cost of the post-9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. As of November 30th, the United States had already spent nearly $5.4 billion since U.S. airstrikes against ISIS began in August 2014. It's $11 million every day. When we pay for our wars with a credit card and when the pain of war is felt only by our troops and their families, it's far too easy for our nation's leaders to send soldiers into harm's way without a national conversation about the merits of our involvement, and far too easy for those conflicts to drag on. I think the most compelling thing you write about is how the burden is unfairly shouldered by the military and their families. Tell us about that piece of this, which I think everybody can appreciate.
Well, that's right. As we look back at the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States had charged into war in Afghanistan against the Taliban and al-Qaeda that had attacked the United States in 2001, and in Iraq against Saddam Hussein, with no conversation, no serious thought given to how we would pay for those wars, both the very long-term human costs of caring for and supporting our veterans who personally bear the scars and the sacrifices of battle, and with no real thought to putting the costs of those 2 wars on America's credit card and thus burdening our children and grandchildren with those costs. As a member of the Foreign Relations Committee and the Appropriations Committee, I'm trying to raise my hand and say we're not doing our job in Congress. President Obama sent us an AUMF, that's Washington speak for a request for a declaration of war against ISIS, all the way back in February, and we have not taken it up, debated it, and passed it, and we owe that to our veterans and to those serving in the conflict against ISIS, but we also need to stand up and say, how are we going to pay for it? All the previous wars, as you referenced, before Iraq and Afghanistan, had a dedicated war surtax, and I think that's one way we could fairly pay for it, with a small surtax that exempted active duty military families and veterans, but there's other ways we could pay for it. We just can't keep going without even discussing it.
Senator, yeah, the surtax idea makes sense logically, but then you run into a small, and this is just to play devil's advocate, a small problem, which is it's really difficult to actually budget for wars. For instance, the initial projections for the cost of the Iraq War, I believe, were $50 to $60 billion, ended up being well over $1 trillion. So what happens when that surtax isn't enough? What happens when you have to go back to the well?
Well, you literally can adjust the amount of the surtax annually in order to meet the needs of that specific conflict. It frankly will make members of Congress hesitate. There's a whole lot of outrageous statements being made, very aggressive, very bellicose statements being made by Republican presidential candidates and by others of my colleagues in the Senate about how much they would do, how aggressive they would be. I think if they also had to vote to fund the cost of the wars they are threatening to expand, it would create somewhat of a speed bump. It would force us to debate not just the strategy of the war against ISIS, which we need to more seriously contemplate. It would also force us to look at the cost, short-term and long-term, of the conflict that we are already well into against ISIS.
Senator, a question from Gene Robinson.
Senator, why isn't Congress taking a vote? Why isn't Congress voting to support, to fund the wars? Is it pure politics? Is it disagreement with the policy? Why?
Well, we did take up and pass an AUMF, a declaration of war, through the Foreign Relations Committee late in the last Congress. It did not make it to the floor, and under this current Republican-controlled Congress, we have not taken it up and debated it. And, Gene, centrally, it's because there's a disagreement. A group of us, Republicans and Democrats, on the Foreign Relations Committee have tried to cobble together a bipartisan coalition, but I think there is legitimate concern by our committee chairman and ranking member that we wouldn't be able to get a strong bipartisan vote, and they worry that that would undermine the war effort. respect that concern, but several members of the committee, excuse me, Senator Kaine of Virginia, principally myself and several others, Republicans and Democrats, think we owe it to the people to debate this issue and to take it up and vote on it. If we're going to have critics of President Obama's strategy in Syria and Iraq, then we ought to do our job and debate strategy and debate authorization and do the role that the founders imagined for Congress.
But realistically, Senator, what do you see the chances of that happening, especially as we go into this election year and everything becomes even more politically fraught than it is otherwise? And if the AUMF can't even come up, then where do you go legislatively with this, with your arguments?
Well, I understand that with the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary just a month or 6 weeks away, that the argument, oh, we can't do anything serious because we're in the middle of a presidential election, does begin to hold some sway. But we can't have a country where Congress fails to do its constitutional duty simply because we have an election. That runs against the founders' vision that we could both legislate and have campaigns at the same time in a vibrant democracy. I do think if we bring this up in committee, enough responsible senators will step up and make compromises that we will end up with a meaningful authorization. At the very least, I think we owe it to those who we've sent into harm's way, who are currently serving in Iraq and Syria, to know that we've got their back and that we authorize the actions that they're taking. I am concerned, given the trajectory of the presidential campaign, that we've got some candidates, Donald Trump in particular, but others, who are making statements that are just outrageous and that, frankly, are playing right into the frame that ISIS wants us to be saying about our conflict with terrorism in the Middle East.
It's an important piece. Senator Chris Coons, thank you for writing it. Thank you for being here.